Have you seen the latest Kendrick Brothers movie, The Forge? Today we discuss the film's primary theme of discipleship, including forgiveness, obedience, and honesty in prayer. We address quality and value in Christian film and debunk the perfect ending myth. We also take a look at how the movie puts its money where its mouth is by providing additional discipleship resources. Lots of good topics on today's episode of Those Few. The Forge was released in the U.S. in August of 2024, and it's been on Netflix, I want to say, since December. I saw it on my feed in Netflix, like recommended movies, and I just want to pause for a second and say, how cool is that on a non-faith-based platform that, you know, that movie is available, and it was actually pushed to me, maybe because of, you know, other things that I've watched, but I thought that was pretty cool because that's how I saw it, and that's how I decided to watch it.
Yeah, I agree. I think Netflix has gotten a little pushback on some of the stuff from believers on some of the stuff that they're putting on, and that may have some to do with it. And I think it's even more than that, just the demand. People are wanting clean these days. So anyway, that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I've kind of gathered a little bit that maybe Hollywood might be getting the message that folks, that there's money to be made on clean, wholesome, faith-based movies.
Right.
And I think that's an excellent thing because there is so much garbage that is out there. Yeah. All right, so what's The Forge about? The Forge is, again, a Kendrick Brothers movie, and it is about a young man named Isaiah Wright. He's just out of high school, not planning on going to college, is directionless, plays video games a lot, does not have a job, plays a lot of basketball with his friends, has definitely showing quite a bit of disrespect for other folks, even for his mom to some extent, to certainly male figures, adult male, older men, shows disrespect towards them, does not have ambition, does not have get up and go, room's a mess, doesn't help around the house, all that kind of stuff. His mom's a praying woman. She's a believer. He is not. She's connected with other, believers, believing women. They pray for him. He ultimately ends up looking for a job at a sports equipment, manufacturing company, and is taken under the wing of a character named Joshua Moore, who's the president of that company. And Moore is a believer and not only offers him a job, but offers him some basic mentoring. It starts with the simple things of set an alarm, show up on time, meet your commitments to other people, but then later turns on, into serving others, and then more of a Christian message. And then one point in the movie, Isaiah does accept Christ and grows in that. We won't give away, too much about what's going on in the movie, but the primary theme that I see in it anyways is discipleship.
Yeah, I agree. In probably 5 or 10 minutes of the movie, I was reminded of just the condition of a fatherless society. And you and I have talked about that before, and that can work in different ways. There can be situations where the father is in the home, but he's totally disengaged mentally and spiritually. Or it can be, something more like what's in the movie where the guy has really never known his dad. Dad hasn't been in the home hardly at all. And what little bit I think he had, he didn't even remember if he had it all. I can't.
It wasn't good. There was bad stuff there, like unfulfilled promises of remaking or redoing that car that was in the garage and stuff. Yeah.
But and as the movie portrays, there's always redemption, and there's always forgiveness, and there's always a father to be had somewhere.
Yeah. It's fascinating because it has so much to do with the Great Commission and discipling other believers, which means not just having them accept Christ or kind of walking them through by sharing the gospel, but actually teaching them to obey and to teaching them to truly follow Christ. So I'll just read the Great Commission here, because this is really, discipleship is going to be one of the major themes of the podcast, right?
Yeah.
As we honestly get our heads around what is discipleship, what truly is it? Because I don't think we're doing a good job with it in our American church today. Yeah. So that's a broad, generalized statement. But even having been in the church for decades, I don't have my head fully around what discipleship is, and how to do it well, those kinds of things. So a big part of this podcast is this workshop. This is like us workshopping, right? Saying, all right, what is this stuff? What is discipleship? Who's doing it well? What kind of models are out there for this, if that's one way to look at it? And then as we get our heads around it, how can we help others to understand what discipleship is and teach that and equip them to go do their own discipling, right? And then here comes the movie The Forge, right? So that I thought that was good timing towards the beginning of our podcast. But anyways, here's Matthew 28, verse 18 through 20. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. And I'm pretty sure we'll talk about this in another podcast, but I think that one of the things that's fascinating about the Great Commission is that it does not specifically say share the gospel. It's implied, right? Because how can you disciple people unless you share the good news of Jesus and walk them through those beginning steps of salvation, right? Yeah. But so much of the emphasis in models that I've seen is on the sharing of the gospel and on baptizing, and then welcome to the church. Here's a Bible. Go to big church, go to small church, a discipleship group, and we won't say it this openly in front of you, but we hope that by osmosis, you somehow learn the fundamentals of the faith by stepping in on whatever sermon series we happen to be in and stepping in on whatever this small group or life group happens to be doing. There does not seem to be a structured way. Not that we're looking for like catechism, like, from the Catholic Church and maybe other, churches, but there doesn't seem to be a structured way of doing that, nor a modeling of that. So back to The Forge, you have that president of the company, Joshua, who really begins mentoring and discipling Isaiah, shows up in a bunch of different ways in terms of Joshua creating an ongoing relationship with him and meeting with him in the mornings, some mornings for breakfast, right, to have good discussions, having him join him in a service opportunity, right, like a food bank sort of thing, talking about discipleship both with Joshua and Joshua's wife, and saying things, and I'll just kind of click through some of the things that were touched on in the movie discipleship-wise. They said discipleship of Christ versus mere church attendance, right? That those are two different things. Totally agree with that. And that they're looking to be devoted to Jesus versus just calling themselves Christians. And I believe it was the wife of Joshua who said that they would do anything that he, the Lord, calls them to do. They made the distinction between wanting salvation versus wanting to be Christ's disciple. They talked about the cost of discipleship, carrying your cross, living for him, giving up things, getting in the way of your relationship with him. In Joshua's case, that was golf. And in Isaiah's case, it was a number of things, but video games was one of them, right? They said there's a cost to following Jesus, but it's 100% worth it. They talked about dying to the self. And in a bit of a crisis moment, one of the things that Isaiah says while he's praying in his bedroom is either you are Lord, and what he meant was you are Lord of my life, or you are not. And he decided that he was, and that's where he began giving things up that were getting in the way of his relationship with the Lord. then you've got, Joshua's model of that group that they called the Forge, right, which was made up of men whom he had mentored, who now are bringing younger men that they are now mentoring. So it's a group of Christian men, older men, who have been walking with the Lord for a while, who are now one-on-one in this particular case, mentoring, maybe one-on-two, but I think generally it was one-on-one, mentoring like a next generation, right, of disciples for Christ. And another quote here in this vein, most churches are trying to win converts, but not enough are effectively discipling them. And then there's this call also at the end for that Joshua makes, that the Forge, in other words, discipling, that's really what he was saying, it needs to expand as well. Another quote here, the world doesn't need more lukewarm churchgoers. We need more believers who are wholeheartedly following Jesus. So that was some of the things I picked up on in terms of their emphasis on Christian discipleship in the movie.
Yeah. Just as you were talking, I was just sitting here thinking about discipleship, what the Bible talks about it. And Jesus obviously discipled. He had 12, but he only had 12. I mean, the creator of the universe had 12 disciples. He spoke to multitudes of people, but he had 12 disciples. And the movie kind of goes in that direction, that it's not about how many people you touch personally, but the quality of the discipleship that takes place. And when you compound, you start multiplying, it spreads quickly. It's like a cold.
Yeah.
And even, to go back to Jesus' example, the creator of the universe had 12 disciples, and one of them went bad.
Yeah.
He turned away.
Yep.
He betrayed him. There is as you were saying earlier, there's a push to evangelize and to rake in just astronomical numbers of people. And I don't want to get too far out into the weeds with this, but I got to ask, where are these people in 5, 10, 20 years? The ones that are being reached, so to speak, through evangelism. What becomes of them down the road? Have they multiplied? Anyway, just a thought as you were talking there.
Yeah, and I think that one of the misunderstandings about Christianity is that in truth and biblically, Christianity is a thorough, all-in, inside-out, total transformation process. That's a strong element of Christianity. That Christ deserves and wants holiness in all of our areas of life, that everything's dedicated to him, that our family life, our thought life, our exercise, our eating, our entertainment, that everything, academics, everything belongs to him, that we do everything for him. And so it's this thorough process, right? Like he said in the Sermon on the Mount, it's not just about not committing adultery. It's about not even thinking about committing adultery.
Right.
It's not, just about not murdering people. It's about not even being angry without reason with your brother. And then if you are angry, here's what you need to do about it. If you've been wronged, here's how you deal with that within, especially within the church. Here's the importance of forgiveness, also touched on pretty heavily in the movie, right?
Yeah.
But I think that when you rightly talk about Christ's 12 apostles that he poured into, right? And well said, one of them was a betrayer, right? There's a lot of time that he spent with them. And in the movie, I think we see that reflected in the part where Joshua, again, the older gentleman, spent like 2 years with each of those men that were now mentoring other people in the Forge. 2 years of meeting with them and mentoring them in a regular manner, right? Where it sounds like they're meeting weekly, maybe even more than weekly if you're using the model where I thought he was meeting with Isaiah a couple times a week for breakfast, and really pouring into them and walking with them through the things that they're going through, right? Because Isaiah has all these issues with his dad. He's working now at this exercise company. Who shows up at the door as a driver, related to a delivery? It happens to be his dad. Isaiah kind of flips out, and Joshua is right there alongside him to help walk him through that crisis moment, and takes him to his office and helps to talk about the issues with his dad, to talk about forgiveness, to reach into him, to share his own struggles that he had when something, I won't say it, I don't want to ruin the movie for folks, but when a crisis happened within his life, et cetera. So I think as demonstrated by Christ and as reflected in the movie The Forge, the process of discipleship requires a lot of energy and a lot of like close knowledge between, mentor and mentee, right? The one discipling and the one being discipled.
Yeah. And I don't, talking about numbers a few minutes ago and how we tend to measure numbers of salvations and numbers of baptisms and so forth. That kind of investment into people's lives, you can't measure that. There's going to be a return on that is astronomical. Mm-hmm. You can't even, because as you were saying, it's like a ripple effect. It just keeps going.
Yeah.
And you touch one person through your discipleship and you keep investing in that person over and over again. Well, that person touches someone maybe just one time, but it changes the course of that person's life.
Yeah.
There's just a compounding exponential factor there that you can't even begin to calculate.
It reminds me of cellular growth, right?
Yes.
When you think about, you think like a baby, or it just, when it's a zygote, I'm trying to remember biology, my age, where the cells divide and then those cells divide and then those cells divide. Right. They're not dividing as in like a church dividing and pitted against one another. This is growth.
Right.
This is the process of maturing.
Right.
And when one divides, it goes into two, and when two divide, they go into four. So you start seeing, more of like an exponential increase, what you were talking about there. But I think also that when you're discipling somebody, this is a close relationship, right? I'm looking at Christ's model.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at what the guys were touching on in the movie that we're talking about today. And I think one of the things, like if you're mentoring me, if you're discipling me, one of the best things that I can see in that process of me growing in discipleship and understanding the cost of discipleship and beginning to pay that cost of discipleship is to see how you handle a problem. And if we're walking pretty close with one another, I probably have a good idea what's going on in your life. And at some point, I'm not saying 2 years is the magic number, but nor are these guys. But it's a long-term thing. Let's just put it that way.
Sure.
It's a serious investment.
Yeah.
That over that time frame where you're discipling me, you're probably going to go through something hard. Something is going to happen that is difficult in some way. Me watching you learn of that issue, focus on the issue, the manner in which you orient to the problem, and think about the problem and respond to that problem and then work through it, pray through it, etc., has such an enormous molding effect on me. If you handle yourself badly with bad language and bad attitude and everything, I might end up blowing you off as a hypocrite. It might serve as a model for me, and I end up showing the same type of behavior in short order when I deal with something difficult. But if I watch you, John, handle it in a God-honoring way and in a biblical way and in Christ's way of flipping the world on its ear, right, and handling something in such a different way. I think of David, like, not killing Saul, right? Because he was the Lord's anointed. You're like, what? He was right there in the cave. He was in your hands and you didn't kill him? And he was like, no, I did not. That's like, his life is in God's hands. I'm going to leave it to God. I'm not killing the Lord's anointed leader of our people. And it's like, I need to see you do that and to live out that otherworldly reality of Christianity. And then I start to get it because I've seen somebody that I care about who has faced a real issue and has handled it with biblical integrity. Now I have a model for how to process it when I face my own frustrations, disappointments, or crises.
Yeah, and Joshua, is that the right name?
That's the older gentleman, yeah.
Older gentleman, yeah. So he definitely portrayed that. I think early on in the movie, he was undergoing serious issues with his company, and Isaiah is watching him respond, and he could have been in a situation where, hey, I'm Joshua, I'm going to help disciple you and show you how to grow, and then turn around and be a completely different person with his reactions to his business and reactions to other employees and so forth. And that was not the case. He handled himself as a discipler would and should, and in a Christ-like way, and I think the movie is great at showing that even people that seem like they have it all together are gonna face problems. It's just gonna happen, and there's always the choice of how do we deal with those things. And there's so much there in the movie that you could talk about.
And Isaiah modeled kind of selfless giving, right? Because he used what otherwise would be some of the profits of the business to fund the development and manufacturing and shipping, actually sending things that are needed in poverty-stricken countries. And that's how he ran his business, was to fuel ministry that he was directly engaged with in terms of applying the expertise of that company to solutions, generators, or I'm trying to remember what all they had, their solar powered something or other, et cetera, that helped people in difficult, living situations. And then, of course, it builds to the climax where they're having some real drama with the company. And then, you see, I'll just put it this way, because again, I don't want to be a spoiler here, but you see how Isaiah gets it, right? By the end of the movie, as he's been growing, he has been listening. He has been well discipled by Joshua. He gets it. And then here's such an important reality in Christianity. It's not just about knowing it in your head. It's about actually doing that thing, right? It's not about, I've heard this lesson before. I've heard that story before. I've heard that doctrine before. It's about actually living it out, like we were touching on earlier, this thorough requirement of Christianity that we live out this thing, that we actually put it into practice, like Christ talked about. When he was talking about, whether you're building on the foundation, where you dug down and built it on rock, or you just put it, up on the sand. Did you put into practice what I did? Again, with James, right? Faith without action is dead. And so it's nice to see that even within the movie, it's kind of a quick cycle, because you have an hour and a half or hour and 45 minutes or whatever the movie length is. It's a pretty quick turn, but you see the investment and the growth and the putting into practice all within the movie. So you're seeing some nice, pretty full cycle discipleship going on there.
Yeah. The amount of investment from Joshua, you really can't even put a quantity on that. There's no telling how much time. But he was having blessings returned without even looking for it, and in the way of employees who were dedicated, who were willing to go above and beyond and to help his company out during hard times. And there's another ripple effect of just blessing, not just continuing disciples or disciples making disciples, but having blessings return by being a blessing. And that shouldn't be our goal. It shouldn't be, what we're looking to get back anything. But it's amazing how God works through trials, through bringing back when someone has invested their life into people, and he can use that to help you out in a pinch down the road, and that's evident in the movie.
Yeah, it's not like a monetary transaction,
right?
Where one person loses and the other person gains. It's like in God's quote economy, goodness begets goodness begets goodness. And that's not to say that we don't have suffering and pain and trial. That's another big theme of Christianity and certain theme of the podcast that we're doing. But yeah, he can do things that you just can't even imagine, and absolutely right that Joshua reaped benefits that he probably, of course, that could not have been his intent, within the movie. So. Other themes, you're going to have prayer as a theme there. We've seen that in War Room as well, right? Major theme. You've got a good presentation of the gospel. You had, I like this. Isaiah picks up the track for the Romans road. Is it track or tract? Tract. He picks up the tract he picks up the pamphlet for the Romans road. But he doesn't just pick it up. They show him reading through Romans Road. Yeah. So he actually, you're actually reading the Word of God there. So I'd say well done, well done on that. So I thought that they were effective at presenting the gospel, and I think that is so important to do that. We hope you're enjoying today's discussion. We want to take a quick opportunity to tell you about truthspeak.org. That's truth-speak.org, where you'll find resources, recommendations, and devotionals to help in your walk with Christ. Under resources, check out The Lowering Sky, a gritty and honest story-based devotional for adults. Also check out Carter and the Crosshairs, a young adult coming-of-age novel about bravery, hard work, and self-sacrifice. Under recommendations, see our growing list of recommended books, movies, and music, including links to our associated podcast episodes. And don't miss our devotional page, where you'll find all that you know, the unfiltered Jesus of the Bible. Now, back to our discussion. There are so many subtopics that they touched on. I'll just click a handful of them out. Treat others as you want to be treated. Issues of respect, becoming a man, handling anger toward others. One of the quotes was, "Be a fountain, not a drain." In other words, give more than you take. They were touching on the fruit of the Spirit, the worship of work, and they appropriately cast that in a negative light. Even some of the basics in terms of becoming an adult, of introducing yourself properly, showing up to work on time. There's issues there, like we said before, with forgiveness, addressing issues of affirmation, apologizing when you're wrong, like he does, like Isaiah does in the movie, and that was a very nice touch to what he did there. Taking responsibility, keep moving forward in the faith, etc. So there's a lot of topics that they touched on there, and as I was thinking about this, and as you and I were talking before recording the episode here, there are so many topics, those subtopics. It felt to me a little bit like an IKEA table that you buy and you open the box and you're like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of parts here. Right. But once you put it all together, it makes a solid, good-looking table, which is what I think of the Forge. But I think another reality to take that even, I don't know if that was very deep, but to take that deeper, is that discipleship covers a lot of ground. And when you talk about the cost of discipleship, you're covering a lot of ground. And I think by including a bunch of those topics, they were demonstrating in the movie that discipleship covers many aspects of our lives. So when I look at it from that standpoint and understanding that this really is a discipleship movie, I say that does hold water for me, that they included so many subtopics here.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a ton. We could probably unpack that movie for several hours.
Yeah.
And I think for me, one of the big things, just to touch on something you've already talked about a little bit, was the forgiveness issue. Everything that Joshua was pouring into him, Isaiah could have ruined a lot of that and had major setbacks in his growth, maybe even started going the wrong direction, had he not forgiven his father.
Yeah.
And to go along with that, the struggle, the one thing that I really appreciate about the movie is that this wasn't just magical. God hits you over the head with a magic wand and makes you be a different person.
Yeah.
He had obvious struggles with everything. Yeah. And the forgiveness of his father was huge. He fought with that. He wrestled with it like Jacob, mm-hmm. Just a grappling, just a gritty, hard, crying, yelling to God, mm-hmm. telling him that you don't understand, mm-hmm. telling him everything that you might think he doesn't want to hear. Mm-hmm. But he knows your heart, and he wants you to be honest with yourself about your heart. That's the big thing. And for him to just say, I don't want to forgive my dad, basically, and to have that hard talk with God, to me was huge.
Yeah.
And it shows the struggle of the Christian, the thing that's common to all of us is a wrestling with God over our flesh and our condition, and to be honest with him, because he already knows, it's not like we're going to surprise him.
Yep.
It's more about coming clean to ourselves in front of him and acknowledging to ourselves what God already knows. Mm-hmm. And anyway, the movie's just packed with that kind of stuff, and I totally appreciate it. Talking about things going exponentially, mm-hmm. the Kendrick Brothers in this movie it's gonna have exponential effects on the world.
Yeah. And I really like how they are focusing on the distinction of becoming and living the life of a disciple versus just calling yourself a Christian. Because I think we got a lot of folks that are calling themselves Christian and not paying the cost, not doing the will of the Father,
right.
Not really digging down to the foundation, or when they face their crisis, like Isaiah faced in the movie, of confronting his father at the delivery and then of the goods at the place of business and everything, and then dealing with it at home, which, like we talked about before the episode, very powerful scene there that, again, we won't ruin for anybody, but a powerful scene. That might even be, there's an argument that I'm not saying that's it's not the climax of the movie, but it's like a climax for him.
Yeah.
For his, sure. Because what he did was he had a fledgling faith that was beginning to grow, and then he had a serious challenge, and he had to do something with that.
Yeah.
And I think there are people out there who call themselves Christians, and then the moment that persecution comes, they prove themselves to be, the soil that's in the rocky area that has shallow, and they have shallow roots, and the sun comes out, so to speak, and they wither, right? But he worked through persevered through it, right, to ultimately generate fruit. And I thought that was well done.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. It was like that point of him struggling with that and seeing his dad in person and struggling with that whole forgiveness issue, it was like he had been growing up to that point, but after he had that wrestling with God about forgiving his dad, he was coming around third base at that point.
Yeah.
He was coming on home at that point, and the way he handled life in the rest of the movie was much more mature as a Christian, much more mature as just a person in general, and his reactions to people, and just how he saw life was very different after that point.
Yeah. Again, I think that our spiritual lives are like I think I mentioned this in a previous episode, but it's like a spiral staircase in a castle, and you can spiral up or you can spiral down. And once you begin spiraling down, it's just that much easier to go further and further down because your momentum is going down. Once you take that first step to go up and to begin spiraling up, well, you've already taken that step and you can do it.
Yeah.
And like God's given you the ability to do that. And well, there's another step. Why don't I just take that one too? And then once you've covered 10, well, you can do another 10, right? And you get that momentum going up as well. So I think that good begetting good and bad begetting bad in our spiritual lives it can have a turning point when you do have a crisis. And to your point, that character Isaiah makes the decision to forgive his dad, and then you see a whole bunch of other good things come from that. I think his apology to that man to the coffee shop owner, I think was after that. I'm trying to remember if it was.
Yeah.
But I think the point that you were touching on there is that when you've made one decision for the Lord and you've given one thing up, that was getting in the way, it's just that much easier to. I'm saying you've already done it. You're kind of getting a habit now. That maybe can build into a virtue. To kind of hearken to some C.S. Lewis there, right? And in terms of doing those good things, taking those steps, or giving up those things that are becoming, that come between you and the Lord. So you can have that momentum, and that crisis moment is so important that you take a step up and not a step down, right? That you choose for the Lord and not choose against the Lord,
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you totally.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying too about God already knows what's going on in your life. So, if you're out there and you're saying, the feelings and thoughts that I have inside me right now are not things that I feel like I can tell the Lord about. Well, he knows already. And just get into the Psalms, right? And you look at the agonizing that David and other writers of Psalms had, and the things that they said. There's one, I'm trying to remember the number, but literally says, the darkness is my closest friend. He was in a rough moment when he said that. But this is the inspired word of God. And unlike a whole big chunk of Job, where a whole bunch of people got chewed out and were doing wrong in that, so you got to be careful where in Job you quote from, right? Is it the part where they were not speaking right about the Lord, or is it the part where Job, accuses God of wrongdoing? He has wronged me, right? You got to be careful about what you quote from in Job. We're not talking about that here, though, in the Psalms. So when David and others talk about the deep anguish that they are in, not only can those Psalms serve as your prayers, right? You will find that God provides you his word sometimes so, as though he's like praying on your behalf, not just with groans through the Spirit, but through his word also, I believe, that you can be dead honest with him, and it is best for your relationship if you are. I guess the only thing I would say, and I know we're getting a little further away from the forge here, we'll come back, but the only thing I would say on that is, when you are communicating your heart to God, never accuse him of wrongdoing, because that is anathema, totally against his character. He can't do wrong. So never accuse him of wrongdoing. Job actually made that mistake. We can talk about that one another time. you can say things to him like, Lord, I feel like you're not taking care of me as you should. That must not be the case. I must not understand, but that's how it feels. That's very different than saying, Lord, you're a child abuser, right? Which I honestly, in my sordid walk, have made that accusation against him, and it was absolutely wrong for me to do that, But as you're talking about the things with God that matter, that are those deep things that come out of deep trial and things, you can be dead honest with him, but do it in an atmosphere of reverence, and you will be honoring him and not wronging him in that. So we didn't intend to talk about that stuff, but
I think that's a good thing to talk about, though. And to me, that struggle with Isaiah in the movie is very real, and to talk about David a little bit, there's so many of the Psalms where he's, like you said, he's not condemning God, but he's asking him why, even why have you forsaken me?
Right.
Why have you left me?
Yep.
I feel alone right now.
Yep.
And I feel like you don't hear me. I don't feel like you're listening. And to just be, God already knows you feel that way.
Yeah.
Just to be, again, honest with yourself about how you feel, that's healing all by itself.
Yeah.
To go down that road.
Yep.
And just was reminded of Psalm 51. I'm not going to read it all, but it's this was after David had sinned with Bathsheba. That whole fiasco, that whole, for lack of a better word, screw up of David's life. He just totally, train wreck. Yeah, he blew everything.
Yep.
Just awful way to handle life in general, and one cover up after another, and yet he's the man after God's own heart, and he comes clean.
Yeah. Because
he was willing to talk to God.
Yeah.
That's it. Just willing to talk and say, hey, I'm an idiot, created me a clean heart.
Yep.
I need you to renew me. Anyway, good stuff. I mean, good. And there's, again, so many things to unpack from that movie that just point you to the scripture, point you to the players of the Bible, and you can see examples of the disciples, of the Old Testament heroes, everyone through the Bible you can see, you can talk about, and man, that's what you want from a movie. You know, to have people pointed toward Christ and pointed toward a positive, spiritually positive life.
Yeah. I've been talking about some good things of depth here. I'll bring it up to a little bit of a shallower level here and just say this is a very well done movie.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. I mean, this is a quality professional movie, professional actors doing a really good job, well edited. I mean, the whole thing. It's just a very good movie, like a high quality movie. And it's funny, John, you and I were talking about that difference between, some of the newer Kendrick Brothers movies like The Forge and the old stuff, right? The original, the OG, movies, when they were, at least to my knowledge, like primary trailbreakers on Christian film.
Yeah.
Right.
As far as I know. Yeah.
War Room. What was it? Flywheel?
Yeah. There's one called Flywheel and Facing the Giants.
No, it's I think it went Flywheel and then Facing the Giants.
Yeah.
And, back then, and I just want to address this just for listeners who might be kind of thinking about this. The value in the movies is the message. It is the Christian message that's coming through.
Yeah.
Over the course of time, the quality of these movies, which is a secondary or tertiary element of them, by no means primary.
Right.
But it has gone up a lot. The interesting thing is that there's no saying that The Forge has more value than does Facing the Giants, with acting which wasn't maybe as strong, right, et cetera. Because, when the Lord goes and weighs everything at that the great judgment, weighs all the things that we've done, rewards us for the good things that we've done, the things that we've done that are of wood, hay, and straw, burn up and everything. Who's to say that, the Kendrick Brothers and anybody else who worked on that movie aren't going to get greater rewards from facing the giants than they would, or Flywheel, than they were for The Forge, right? It's just, it has nothing to do with the quality of the movie here, right? The spiritual reality of things, the things not seen, those are the things that matter. Yeah. So if somebody looks back at those movies and looks down on them, it's like, these guys were trailblazing Christian movies, Christian film, and those movies can move me, man. Like I don't cry very much. I can cry. I can tear up at some of those older movies as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, and I'm just speaking in ballpark terms here, but I think they've been at this for around 20 years or so,
Feels
25
like
maybe.
Feels like it.
At least that the general public knows about. I'm sure they, were delving into it even maybe before that, but I think I watched Facing the Giants in the early 2000s maybe.
Okay.
So it's probably been 20 years since the first time I saw that.
I feel like I blink in 20 years.
Yeah, no kidding. You said it. The quality is through the roof better.
Yeah.
But I can't tell you how many times I've watched Facing the Giants and still watch it.
Yeah.
And still love it.
Yeah.
Because of the message.
Yeah.
Not, it's not about critiquing the acting or anything like that.
Yeah.
And which, for I'm sure for the budget that they had at the time and for who they were able to round up for the movie and the experience that they had at that point, I felt like they hit a home run with it.
Yeah.
At that time. And at that point in time, there wasn't any choices.
Yeah.
You couldn't go to Netflix or Prime or whatever and scroll through Christian movies. There weren't any.
Yeah.
It was all, what's the least filthy thing you want to watch today?
Right. Yeah.
And so yeah, they've created a world, an avenue for Christians to have something to view that maybe has a little bit of entertainment value.
Right.
But they're pointing people to Christ.
Yeah.
They're pointing fathers to Christ. They're pointing sons and daughters and wives to Christ.
Yeah.
And showing what God in a relationship and discipleship and all of that can bring a person to.
Absolutely. The value of it is the message that they're bringing, and they're bringing the message well and seem to do that regularly, right, with the various movies that they've put out. And I think also on another, somewhat shallower topic, but I think it's important to hit on these things too, right? Yeah. To just kind of kick them around and get them out on the table, right? Is, some might say, oh, here's another Christian movie with its Pollyanna story ending. In other words, everything works out well in the end. Everything ties up well. It works. It's just, you couldn't imagine it going better. It's time to tear up, and looking at that with cynicism. I guess that I would say, one thing about the Christian life, inclusive of eternity, is it does have a great ending, right? Or maybe it's a great beginning, right? It always will have that. So that's one thing I would say. But about the Forge specifically, Joshua lost a loved one, right? He does not ever get him back, and he won't.
Right.
They're not bringing him back. That's not a Pollyanna ending.
Right.
He and his wife lost a loved one, and that's permanent. There's nothing Pollyanna about that. Isaiah reaches out to his dad, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
It's left unknown. It's a question mark.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe there's some hope at the end.
Yeah.
But it's a question mark as in terms of whether or not things will work out well. So while the Forge also has a very satisfying resolution, right? Great climax and resolution to it, and things are tying, there's a number of things that tie out well. It does not have, I think, an unrealistic perspective on the reality that we do sometimes lose things, and we do sometimes have pain that will be that will, in one way or another, have some lifelong impacts to it. And the story reflects that as well. And I appreciate that element too.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I suppose if you're looking for it to be a Pollyanna story, that's all you're going to see.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, we don't know what happened with his dad. You know, maybe that'll be another movie down the road. Who knows? But Joshua never got his son back, like you were saying. It's even evident in the movie that after Isaiah comes to a point where it seems like he's kind of firing on all 8 cylinders spiritually, and as a man and as a follower of Christ, he's still all of a sudden faced with a decision about, am I going to work a 16-hour shift?
Mm-hmm.
That's not Pollyanna.
Right.
You know, that's having to dig in and do something that's hard, and maybe making a decision that you wouldn't have ever even contemplated had it not been for coming to Christ.
Yeah.
As well as Joshua, you know, he's now facing a situation with his company, and he doesn't know how he's going to get out of it. God comes through, but he doesn't know how he's gonna get through that situation. And so it wasn't really all, you know, roses for everybody, just because they were following Christ and making disciples and so forth. You know, and I thought the movie was great at showing that struggles continue to come up. You know, it's not just right off into the sunset and happily ever after, you know.
Yeah, there's a strong element of bear down, right? When challenges come up, and do the hard work of being a disciple. And I appreciate that about the movie, in that there's a strong put your money where your mouth is. Right. You're not you didn't just accept Christ. You didn't just get baptized. Very important things. But when you had to face, you know, forgiveness issues, you went and did that. When you had to face letting go of things that are coming between you and the Lord, the video games, the things on his phone, etc., that he began giving those things up. And then, as you mentioned at the end, when there's a crisis at work, that you know, some folks really bore down well and did their work, right? And in the I guess in the nomenclature I was just using, put their money, especially Isaiah, right? Putting his money where his mouth was, saying, I don't just believe that this stuff is true, I'm going to live it out. And so that's probably the difference right there between calling yourself a Christian and really living the life of a disciple, is actually doing the things that are taught, actually obeying, actually paying the cost. And he was doing that. And so, well done, right?
Yeah. And just a couple more, maybe of the lesser things, quote unquote lesser things, early on in the movie with Isaiah and Joshua is he had to take time to teach him how to be a person who is respectful. Mm-hmm. And that was like right out of the gate. That was, you know, and Joshua had this first impression of Isaiah. Yeah. Probably wasn't, you know, the movie doesn't talk about it, but it probably wasn't the best first impression. Yeah. But he recognizes that this kid needs to be taught. He's never been taught. I have to speculate, maybe assume that Christ did the same thing with the disciples, because it goes back to treating other people how you want to be treated, and which Joshua specifically brought that up to him early on, was you treat people the way you want to be treated. Well, that looks like X, Y, and Z. When you meet somebody for the first time, you shake your hand, you tell them your name, you look them in the eye, right? You don't slur your speech. And he was teaching all these things about just being a respectful person. And I thought that was, even though it was even below secondary, mm-hmm. it was not the main part of the movie, but it was showing that stuff comes along with being a disciple, treating, you know, just namely treating other people like you want to be treated, because that's a biblical principle.
Yep.
And, he showed him, hey, this is what this looks like. And he didn't know, he didn't know how to be respectful. He probably didn't even realize that he was disrespectful. Mm-hmm. He had to be shown that. And so anyway.
Yeah. And as you were talking about at the very beginning of the episode about it, like a fatherless society, right? Because, Isaiah's dad was absentee, right? And that Joshua ended up teaching him things that a father should be teaching, right? Yeah. And so he stepped in for those things also, even though they're quote practical, right? They are in the general vein of treating other people like you want to be treated. So, well, I was watching, to kind of bring things to closure here, I was watching towards the end where in one of those meetings of the Forge, again, that group of the mentors and the mentees, the disciplers and the disciplees, if you will. And Joshua was talking about, hey, we need this everywhere, right? I was thinking to myself, okay, Kendrick Brothers, you just threw down the gauntlet. Mm-hmm. You didn't just put a movie out about this. You said, y'all need to be doing this stuff. So I looked online just to see what it is that they're doing. And if you look on Amazon, they do have a number of resources. You look on Amazon or you look on the KendrickBrothers.com website, they do have a number of resources already. Now, remember, this movie came out in August, so this must have all been planned together. So they've got The Forge novelization. It's by Chris Fabry, who's done some work with Jerry Jenkins and others, where he's written a novel about his novel version of The Forge. And then you've got a Priscilla Schreier devotional, it looks like, called I Surrender All. You've got another devotional here called Devoted to Jesus. And then you have a Bible study with video access, and there's 5 sessions of this, so they've got that as well. So not only are they saying y'all need to do this, but they're helping to provide some resources to actually go out and do that. And so I thought that was following through on the challenge that they put out.
Yeah, for sure. That's it seems like that should be, if you're going to make a movie about challenging people to discipleship, you probably ought to
do it.
Yeah, probably ought to do it. So
yeah.
And I think from what I've read and seen, that's been the theme with a lot of the actors of the Kendrick Brothers movies, mm-hmm. and with the Kendrick Brothers themselves, that they're not just making Christian entertainment. They are challenging people to a life of holiness and a life of discipleship and following the Lord.
Yeah. And again, on Amazon, I'm looking through the description of the Bible study book with video access, part of it says, Jesus focused his time and attention on walking with God and making disciples. Shouldn't we? So again, that push, and they're not the ones throwing down the gauntlet directly. It's really, they're just reiterating what Christ said, right? Yeah, sure. He said, go do these things. Yeah. And they're saying, go do these things, right? So it's like a pass-through message, right. But they're putting their money where their mouth is. So that's good stuff. Definitely. So, all right, you want to wrap us up in prayer?
Sure. Lord, we thank you for today, and thank you for everything that you've given to us and all the blessings that you've given to us. And Lord, I'm thankful for the time with Joe and to talk about you and talk about how you are moving in the world. And I just pray, Lord, that these lessons from the Forge and lessons from your word that you have used in the Forge, that you would just impress them on our hearts and give us, again, wisdom as fathers and leaders of families, and to just be open and willing and hearing to do your will and to make disciples, and to be forgiving, to be willing to grow, to be willing to engage with people, to be willing to come down to where people are when they're hurting, to be able to chase after someone who is just become really down on life and had a situation come into their life where they're struggling with being who they're supposed to be and doing the right thing, and to be willing to find those people and engage and just give us wisdom and direction in that. And I just lift all these things up to you and ask and pray in Jesus' name.
Amen.